Hello, everyone. We're just going to begin in about 1 minute, just waiting for a couple other people. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, everyone, for showing up, and thank you for your patience for waiting for us. Our private session ran a little late, unfortunately, but thank you very much. So I would like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of March the 9th to order and acknowledge that our meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin territories. I'd like to thank the Algonquin nations for hosting us on their land. And with that, I would like to call for a mover to approve the agenda. Trustee Huff, thank you very much. And is there any changes to the agenda? Trustee Blackburn, do you have a proposed change?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I would propose that we move 9.2 ahead of 9.1, just switch those two.
Okay, so the proposal on the floor for the agenda is to swap 9.2 and 9.1. So we'd be doing the academic staffing first, followed by the report for universal screening tool. So is there any debate on that? Seeing none, I'd like to call a question on that. All those in favor of that? And opposed? And that is 10-4 and 2 opposed, so that passes. Is there any other changes to the agenda proposed? And seeing none, I'd like to call a question on the revised agenda. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And so we have an agenda, and I do note that 9.1 and 9.2 are shifted. And so moving on to item 3 of our agenda, delegations, and we do have 7 delegations this evening, and they're going to be of 2 minutes duration each. And I would ask that trustees, when you're asking questions of clarification of the delegates, that we keep, because of the number of delegates, that we keep our questions as brief as possible and possibly without preamble, if possible, so that we can move through with a relative expedient fashion. So with that, I would like to welcome our first delegation, Debbie Hamaluk, and I believe she is already here. So good evening, Ms. Hamaluk. You have 2 minutes, and you can start. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Director of Education, trustees, and staff. I would like the OCDSB to reconsider the decision that has been made to not offer students in specialized programs a similar programming choice in OCV, like those being offered to the in-school learners. Our son is a 9-year-old boy with Down syndrome and autism. He is predominantly nonverbal. We have tried integration in past school years, and it does not work well for him. If he could not manage in school being integrated, there is no possible way that he will be able to function in a grade 5 remote classroom. In our situation, due to serious health concerns in our home, in-school education is not an option during the pandemic. You are correct. In-school learning for learners is best. However, you cannot expect families to put education before safety. We need a more suitable option and flexibility. Brennan and other special needs students have the human right to a meaningful education. The decision to not provide specialized programming through remote learning for the upcoming school year does not coincide with the OCDSB's motto, education for all, education for life. The OCDSB apparently prides itself on equity and equality. The education being offered for our son next year is not a reflection of those statements. It actually feels very discriminatory. These students are of your most vulnerable learners and deserve better options. Please find a more suitable option for Brennan and other students with similar needs. Families like ours have been through so much already during the pandemic. Please find a way to include our children in OCV and offer some inclusive and equitable options for our children. I have heard from many families that they will be homeschooling or changing school board out of fear and frustration over the changes this upcoming year. We don't want to have to find another option too. My family supports the OCDSB and the public education. Please support my child too in an education meaningful to him. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your delegation, Ms. Hamaluk. And are there any questions? Student trustee Liu.
Hi, and thank you for coming tonight. So I did want to ask, because our board went into, or like our region went into lockdown, so all students had to shift into virtual learning. What was that experience for your family and for your son?
So currently my son receives 20 minutes daily that we do synchronously with the teacher. And then we do periodic learning throughout the day as much as he can tolerate asynchronously. So it's actually working out quite well, and he's home safe.
Thank you very much. Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if at some point the director will be able to provide responses to some of the questions that have been raised, whether to each question as it comes up or whether to all of the questions when we get to the end of the delegations.
Thank you very much. And Madam Director, what is your preference?
Perhaps Trustee Scott, and through you, Mr. Chair, a response at the end, because I think that some of the questions will be responded to or answered or addressed in the upcoming reports that we are bringing as well, because we have contemplated some of these questions, and so a comprehensive inclusion of some of these inquiries will be included there.
Thank you. If they're part of the director's briefing and update and COVID update, that is just fine. I just don't want the questions to be lost.
All right. Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. Any further questions for Ms. Hamaluk? And seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Hamaluk, for your delegation. You're welcome to stick around and and watch what happens here. And moving on to our second delegation, Ms. Genevieve Hart. I don't see you on my screen, but go ahead. You have 2 minutes. And I don't see her. I don't hear her talking. And there are quite a few. There's 61 participants, so it's likely that that she's not present at the moment. Oh, sorry. Not present? Okay. If she does happen to show up, then we'll get her in. We'll get her in at the end. And then so moving on to, Ms. Mollison, did you have something there?
Hi, so she had reached out earlier. I don't know if she had reached out to Rebecca yet. She had said that depending on the situation at home, she would ask if I could read an op-ed that she had done in her place. Unfortunately, she has an issue with her son right now at home, who's also a special needs student. So if that's okay with you, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Mollison.
Thank you. So this was released just as COVID had started, and this is her. These are her words when she wrote the op-ed. I'll read as long as I can into her 2 minutes. So, and I can forward this to you, Mr. Chair, if you'd like, and then you could forward the rest of the op-ed to the rest of the trustees afterwards. In the weeks leading up to the COVID-19, my middle child had daily episodes of aggression, epic meltdowns, and often violent tantrums. A few times, I actually considered calling 911, fearing for my safety. In the last year, he has expressly stated that he wanted to kill himself and that he should die. He's only 6 years old. As the March break camp started canceling and we learned of school closures, my first thought was not about work and juggling everything. It was complete and total fear and panic. I was not afraid of the virus or the economy. I realized I was afraid of my own children. Moreover, with a first responder partner, I essentially became a solo parent overnight. In a pre-COVID week, the kids were in school for 6 hours daily, and mine would have therapy for 6 hours on Saturdays. On Sundays, we often need help for just a few hours at home, just to get the basic things done like laundry or cooking. Those 6 hours of quiet are crucial for me to recover from the previous 15 hours of parenting 2 small children with autism. It was the bare minimum I needed to survive, and it was about to disappear, and I was terrified. The internet was littered with ideas for homeschooling, juggling work priorities, and keeping kids occupied, but none of that was realistic for my children. There was not one piece of useful information that could help in my situation. I knew I couldn't be the only one in this position, but it felt like I was. I quickly learned under quarantine, the school system is not only failing my children, it's hurting them. Something happened in those first 3 weeks at home with my kids. First, they started sleeping later than usual. Not a lot, but enough to give them increased rest. Then I noticed that their shirts were not being chewed on or sucked on until they were soaked like they were used to seeing during school days. The anxiety levels decreased more and more, with each passing day with no transitions. It's common for autistic children to struggle with transitions, but I don't think we ever fully understood the act of prepping them and going to and from school were both huge transitions. The 2 to 3 hours before and after school were always difficult, but it never occurred to me that it was because of those transitions. Our 6-year-old was already on medication and we diligently tracked his behavior. In just 2 short weeks of not attending school, is that?
Unfortunately, the 2 minutes are up, Ms. Wilson. So if you could forward the text of we would certainly appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
And if you could pass our appreciation on to Ms. Hart for her delegation. And
I will.
since she's not present, it's very difficult to ask questions of her. So we will also save our questions on this particular delegation. So, and if
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And so then moving on to the third delegation, Maya Taleb, and I see you're on my screen, so very good. You have 2 minutes, Ms. Taleb. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here today on behalf of my daughter who have special needs, and she told me a message and she wants me to transfer it to you. So right now she's doing virtually with her own homeschool, and they ask, or she gonna go back to in person, or they wanna move her to a different class, which is not a good option for us because her immunity is low, my immunity is low, and I have another daughter with special needs in the home too. And she told me to tell you she want to be safe and keep everyone safe. She want to stay in doing virtual learning with her own homeschool, as she knows the teacher, her friends, her EAs. They understand her strength, they understand her weakness, they understand her needs. And she don't want to be moved to different classes where no one know her, and she gonna be feel lonely, and her anxiety will be all the way up, and she won't be like doing anything she do now in her own class, with her regular friends that she know long time ago. It's gonna be so hard for her to move to a different class or to be in person, especially with her difficulty, and that she's in a wheelchair. She have a lot of complication. She have seizures, and also including my health, it's not that good. So she's asked you to hear what she wants. She wants to be supported, and you need to help her to be in safe place and doing her school with her own home virtual schooling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Taleb. And are there any questions for this delegation? And seeing none, I'd like to thank you very much, Ms. Taleb, for your delegation. Moving on to our other to the next delegation, Vanessa House-Millie. And I don't see you on our screen, but if you are, oh, there you are, right in the middle. Thank you very much. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you. The OCDSB recently sent out a survey to students and parents to build on what we have heard so far and to plan for the next school year. Tens of thousands of students expressed their frustration, depression, anger, and sadness, and their struggles getting through the school year. The top parent and student comments reflected my own. The Quadmaster cohort system is not working. The courses are too compressed to allow for optimal learning. The one course a week model, which doesn't allow time to absorb material nor to get help when needed, further exacerbates this issue. Having kids sit in a classroom wearing a mask for 4 hours twice a week learning math and spend the rest of the 32.5 hours alone at a computer studying math is not an adequate way to learn any subject. My youngest daughter, who's in elementary school and attending school full-time, is doing well. My older daughters in high school are not. High-achieving students who usually enjoy school and who regularly participate in sports and clubs, they are now enduring the year, counting down the days until summer and hoping for a better fall. After the survey wrapped up at midnight, February 26th, I assumed this would be the start of an in-depth planning and engagement process. However, at 9:02 the next morning, a fully formed plan magically appeared in our inboxes. I eagerly went through the email only to discover that the current plan is to continue with this year's failing model. The school board can be forgiven for the issues in spring 2020 when school was generally a disaster, but there'd be no time to prepare. This year's model was hopefully then put in place with the best of intentions. However, it's now been 7 months and you've heard directly from students that it's failing. I started a petition about this 2 days ago and there are already 995 signatures and many comments. Please listen to us and take action. Do the research, be innovative, be empathetic, and engage authentically. There must be a model that not only integrates public health guidelines, but also academic and mental health considerations. The primary elementary model has proven that theory, and other boards are considering different models. Please develop an approach that allows students to start the school year with hope and not despair. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Ms. Millie, for that delegation. Are there any questions? Trustee Campbell, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the delegation for their presentation, but actually similar to Trustee Scott, I have a quick question of procedure, I guess. I'm not sure if we're in receipt of the text of these delegations. Have staff received the various texts involved, and will that be made available to committee members?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Indeed, we've received the text. I will turn to Executive Officer about the distribution of the text.
Thank you. Most of these delegations just registered in the last 24 hours. Some of their text, I believe, was added as supplemental information to the agenda, and where it wasn't, we will make sure that it's posted and trustees can access it.
And all committee members?
I think she nodded in the affirmative.
Oh, okay.
Sure,
I
yes.
wasn't sure.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. And Trustee Schwartz.
Mr. Chair, and thank you for the delegation this evening, Ms. Millie. My question to you is related to the Quadmaster, and you were indicating that the Quadmaster model was not working for students, and you've already received a petition of 900 signatures. Can you just give us a sense of what are you hearing would be better?
Well, I mean, ideally, in terms of, both academic and mental health considerations, then the ideal situation obviously would be to go back to full-time in-person learning. If that's not possible, then what I've been hearing from, I guess, other parents, my children, and the various comments, both through the OCDSB survey and also through my petition, because a lot of people commented on that. I think the biggest issue is with the one course a week model. And several people said that even if they could have, for example, 2 courses a day, followed by a day of virtual learning, and then back to 2 courses a day, which I believe is similar to the way the Catholic board has done it this year. So many people said that that would be preferable, and that there's probably one of the biggest issues is having that one course compressed into the 1 week. And so, the kids, like, especially with math and science, but really any subject, having to sit there for either at school or in front of their computers for 30 to 40 hours trying to compress all this learning on, for example, my grade 11 daughter, she's doing AP math. So she's trying to compress a regular semester of math into 2 months with full-time, basically full-time every 2 weeks. So that really has not been working well at all. And that's what a number of people have said too, because it's just so compressed. There's just not enough time to learn, to catch up, absorb the material. And other people have said also that they haven't had time to get help when they need it. And that's caused big issues. And then they've lagged behind. And I think that has led to a lot of stress as well. And I mean, I guess the other aspect is the social aspect, which can't necessarily be fixed with changing to that other type of model. And like I was saying, my daughter, who's in grade 5, she goes to school all day, every day, and she is doing perfectly fine. Like, she's doing great. I mean, they have their cohorts, they wear their masks, they have all the health guidelines in place. But apart from that, it's pretty much like a regular socially interactive day and year for her. Whereas my other daughters, my middle daughter started grade 9. She had a miserable 3 months because she had no chance whatsoever to meet anyone. Luckily, she ended up meeting some people that she was in school with earlier. But I think it's really the social isolation as well that is causing issues. So that wouldn't be fixed by switching to another type of hybrid model. It's really I think the in-person learning that is missing for like the social side, the mental health side, and then really just the learning part as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that thorough answer. And perhaps, Director, during your, I know we discussed this a couple weeks ago and looking at what the model for September might be, but perhaps you could address the first portion of the delegates' commentary related to Quadmaster and how September may look different this year, or the coming school year versus this year. Thank you.
I think she's certainly intending to do that, Trustee Schwartz. And moving on to Trustee Boothby.
And my question is around that, so I'll wait for the director's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Campbell, you still had your hand up. Are you okay? Did you have you never really got to ask a question? Okay, no problem.
Good,
Thank you very much. And moving on to our fifth delegation, Diana Carvey. And do I see you on my screen here?
I am here.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you for having me this evening. I first want to express my sympathy with those people who are struggling with special needs in school. I'm not in that position. I am in the same position as the previous delegate, and I want to support everything that she said. I too was shocked to receive an email from the board with a very misleading subject line suggesting the kids would be back full-time in the fall, I felt. I believe that the school board is not doing enough and not starting what is in the best interests of our children and how we make that happen despite the difficult circumstances. We've learned a lot and we need to act on that. Globally, education is delivered in person for approximately 35 hours a week, 40 weeks a year, and that's what we should aim to get back to. We need to do that for the children's mental health, for their learning, for their socialization, and for their language skills, importantly, for those who don't have English as a first language. So the system presently, for all the reasons that the previous person suggested, I think the Quadmaster system utterly fails. Children, even high achievers, but particularly those who need the support of others and routine to learn effectively, they are getting so little tuition. The afternoons are entirely self-directed. And I note, for example, that the Toronto District School Board actually has remote in-person lessons in the afternoon. So there is more structure around their day. There's so little structure, it varies so much. And the system is failing not only the children, but families. And I note that tonight it's all female delegates talking about this. It is the women of the families who are having to suck up all the pain of this system. It's not possible for our kids who we know hold devices and other things in their hands to study at the level that is required and at the pace we're asking, and our kids will not be prepared for university going forward. I have a grade 11 student, nor will they be prepared for the workplace or for life if the Quadmaster system continues into the fall. There is ample time to prepare for something much better, and the interests of the children should be put fair and at the center of what the school board chooses to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm just wondering if there are any questions for Ms. Carney. Trustee Fisher?
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Carney, for your delegations. I really appreciate your feedback. As a father with a son that just started grade 9 this year, similar to you and the other delegates, I've seen firsthand how difficult this year has really been for his well-being and for his learning. So I appreciate you reinforcing, I think, some of the similar concerns that I have as a parent. I guess it's maybe more of a comment than a question for you, and I think it applies to the other delegate tonight. One of the constraints that we're facing right now is, as you can appreciate through the pandemic, is that we're still designated as a board by the province. We're having to follow certain requirements in terms of the way that we've set up our curriculum. We haven't received much guidance from the ministry in terms of how the fall might look differently, the type of funding we might get. So I think as you're rightfully delegating to us and advising us in terms of the things that we need to be thinking about for the fall, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to your local MPPs and to the Ontario government as well, because we take so much direction from the ministry these days. Unless they're hearing what you're saying, sometimes we're just so limited in terms of what we're able to structure for the fall. And so I just want to make that as a general comment, because I hear you loud and clear. I'm just as frustrated as you are. And we are trying to be innovative, and we're trying to have empathy in everything that we do. But sometimes the ministry puts on certain constraints and directions and that we have to follow. And it might make that planning a little bit difficult. So I just encourage you to reach out to the ministry and to others, and to express what you've expressed tonight to them as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. I would certainly do that. It feels like you're planning for a worst case scenario and locking that in by planning for it, particularly given that Premier Ford suggested that all adults would be vaccinated by the 20th of June, and things could look very different in the fall. I understand you need to plan for the worst case, but thinking about the best case seems to be missing from what you have presented to parents.
I want to assure you, I'm certainly not thinking that way. So thanks for suggesting that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carney, for your delegation. Really certainly appreciate that. And moving on to the next delegation, Lisa Greaves on my screen somewhere. Right there. There you are. Okay. Thank you very much. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Lisa Greaves. I'm the mother of two kids who go to Glebe Collegiate. One's in grade 9, one's in grade 12. And I'm speaking to you today about my concerns regarding the staffing for September of 2021. Given that we think that it's very likely that most people will have received vaccinations by July, and given that the TDSB and the Ottawa Catholic School Boards have both announced that they will be going back to school in the way we are used to, I'm wondering why it is that the OCDSB has determined that we should be staying in this Quadmaster system. My children have both struggled with online in terms of their abilities to comprehend and complete work, and they work much better in class with the ability to interact with other students and teachers. They have suffered a great deal from the fact that every other week they are in school for 8 hours over the entire week. They sometimes go 3 days without leaving the house. My daughter, who's in grade 9, has made no new friends, joined no new clubs, and had none of the experiences that we were so looking forward to Glebe being able to provide her with. The OCDSB talks a lot about the importance of the mental health of our children, our families, and our teachers, and all the other staff within the buildings. And I've not seen any evidence that this system is doing anything to improve anybody's mental health. And in fact, I would say that it's doing the contrary. It's been very detrimental to both physical and mental health. The isolation, the lack of consistency, and the inability to provide any sort of routine to our regular system has been really challenging for almost everyone that I've spoken to. I understand the need to keep people safe, but at this point, I think that it's overreaching. We've not seen huge indicators of spread in the primary and junior grades. I'm not sure that there's any reason to believe that after everyone has been vaccinated, that the high schools will be providing any greater opportunity for COVID to spread. I'm also concerned about the impact that this has had on teachers and their ability to teach information that is so important, but sometimes takes time to sink in so that you can move on to the next thing. I spoke to a history teacher who started in one day in 1880 and had to end with the Holocaust and the end of World War II in the same day. That doesn't do justice to any of the material that they needed to cover, and it's a travesty. I would end with the comment that if we were to go ahead and do the Quadmaster system again next year with no evidence that there's a need for that, that is also a travesty. Thank you for your time and your consideration. I'm really hopeful that we can put a new plan in place. And I also am concerned that my kids are getting a third less school than people in Toronto, people in BC, people all over this country. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Greaves. And are there any questions for Ms. Greaves? And seeing none, moving on to Sarah Young. Sarah Young, okay, you're on my screen. Thank you very much. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to speak. And I'm echoing the last 3 people who've spoken just now very strongly. I'm the mother of a daughter in grade 9 and a son in grade 12. And in October, I started a grade 9 parents network at Glebe Collegiate because there were so many families already by mid-October who were terribly distraught at the isolation and the lack of structure that this system, this model has created for our children. I really want to focus in on the mental health piece. It's absolutely extraordinary, the toll that it has taken. We're dealing with, learning about hospitalization, learning how to save lives. And I am not kidding on that for 1 second. And I'm not alone. We're not alone in that. There are many, many families who are suffering this. This is an absolute travesty, and it doesn't need to be this way. Our 14-year-olds, our 15-year-olds already suffer enough anxiety and depression to have to be at home and to try to be forced to be on camera 4 days a week to try to engage in stuff that's not really even happening. Some days it's half an hour that they're asked to engage with, and the rest of the day is structureless. They're absolutely at a loss, and they've hit the levels of anxiety and depression that is your absolute worst nightmare. We're living an absolute nightmare, paying $400 plus a week because we're uber privileged to do so for therapy to try to save our children. And I'm not being dramatic, and I'm not down, this is not a downplaying. This has to be realized. It has to be talked about. There's a lot of stigma around mental health, but this is happening. This is happening to our children, and it doesn't need to be this way. I really feel that this kind of impact would have been probably already known. This might lead to this. Absolutely, has led to this, and we need to quickly rectify. We need to bring money and resources. We need to demand money and resources from the ministry and make sure that our children are going to be better supported immediately. I'm not even talking about September. I don't understand why there aren't mental health coordinators in place already in the high schools, knowing that the children have been absolutely dropped, secondary high schools. And I've never heard a justification for why they are going to school 8 hours a week. And elementary schools are in full time with 30 people in a class. We've done this for 6 months.
Okay,
and we know that
I'm
there's.
sorry, Ms. Young, I
been
have
no
to interrupt
increased
you right
COVID.
there.
Okay,
I have to
sorry.
interrupt you. Thank you very much for your delegation. And we have a few questions, starting off with Student Trustee Liu.
Hi, thank you for coming tonight. I'm a student in grade 12 right now, and to say that this year has been rough is a very, very, very big understatement. So for the moment and for the rest of this year, we are essentially locked into Quadmasters as per ministry direction. And like, as we've heard from the rest of the delegations, we do hope that there's going to be a better method, a better strategy, a better system for the next school year. But for the remainder of the year, is there a way that the school board on like a board-wide level can better help support students for the remainder of this year?
And is that a question to the delegation, Trustee Liu?
Yeah, like what would you like to see for your kids?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't realize you were asking me. Well, I really just I'm feeling that there's an absolute need for mental health coordinators to be in place. It behooves us to do that immediately, to seek money for that, knowing what we know. We've heard the head of CHEO state that there's a huge influx of kids coming in, and they're coming in twice as ill as ever before. So that the ability for these kids to climb out of that kind of illness, that these kind of eating disorders, sleep disorders, self-harm and suicidal ideation, it's tremendous. So we need mental health support on the ground in the schools. The administration of the schools and the teachers themselves have gone above and beyond as far as I'm concerned. They've had to pivot really hard and fast on so many levels. They've done their best. So please let me state unequivocally that the teachers are absolutely to be thanked for what their efforts are, but they simply can't hold this all up. They can't. They're doing everything they can in the background. So we need those mental health supports. There aren't enough psychologists in the city of Ottawa. There are wait lists. Parents can't get in to see them. We can't get in to see a psychiatrist for 8 months. We're at an absolute standstill here. The only option, we've been told is, well, you'll have to head to emergency when it gets that bad. And I'm blown away. We've done a year of this. We simply can't even imagine that this would be the case in September. And I don't see a single justification for that based on all the stuff we know is happening, the vaccines, all the stuff we see happening already this year. Elementary schools are in full time. I don't understand. So ultimately, we need to be requesting finances and resources for mental health supports. It's absolutely essential.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. Moving on to Trustee Bell.
Thank you very much, Ms. Young, and to the other delegates as well for presenting tonight on issues that are really impacting your families. Very much appreciate it. We've also, all the trustees have been hearing quite a bit about this, especially when it comes to mental health over the past couple of weeks with our plans going forward. My question to you, mental health, thinking about Somerset West Community Health Center, thinking about the other health centers that are around, what are some really good practices? What would you recommend beyond a mental health coordinator? And if you can't answer that tonight, it seems like you're very engaged. I know that all of the trustees would be very much interested in hearing from you and others about what are these best practices that we can pull on right away, right now, because the need is clear from my inbox and from what I've been reading as well, that students need mental health supports.
Yeah, that's a fabulous question, Trustee Bell. I would need to think on that. We've tried to be innovative in small ways where we have small groups of us have it's through the network. We have organized a few, walks for our kids. In the very least, they can get to know each other. It's dreadful for them to think their parents are organizing anything at this age, but we've kind of gone back to play dates, if you will, here and there at the very minimal. I've reached out to the athletics department. Is there not anything they can be doing with our kids outdoors, fitness wise? I'm at a loss to understand why certain clubs are playing in the domes right now. Soccer is playing, basketball is going on indoors. All these things are happening at a certain level with certain clubs, but yet they're absolutely not allowed at our schools. So our kids need movement. Our kids need to feel together outside a screen. So I think as the weather warms up, we need to find ways to engender this for them, and they need the kind of community and peer supports that they could gain. So we have link crews already happening. We've reached, the link crews that work at the grade 11, 12 level to try to inspire the grade 9s and 10s to get together. So they're trying to do that online, but it's not working. And the reason it's not working is because kids have just had it with going online anymore. So they're simply not joining in. So people like the link crew, older senior level kids are trying to do some stuff, and that peer support is really important. I think that's the way you engage with the grade 9s and 10s. So we need to be innovative in terms of peer support, in terms of athletic, not becoming an athlete, but getting them moving. As Lisa Greaves pointed out, our kids are on their screens, which we already know studies show before this happened that it was causing, PTSD and kind of like wartime trauma for, anxiety and depression going way up with screen time. Now they're triple that. There's nothing but screen time. And also it's their education, their only way to get educated. So we need to take time, I think, and place some emphasis on outside the screen. What are we going to have our kids do? Let's get innovative. Let's get them doing treasure hunts outside. I mean, whatever it takes, but ways for them to organize, and ways for, and also mental health coordinators should be there on the ground. They should be ready to receive the kids who are struggling to this level. It's an absolute travesty that there isn't anything there, that there's there's no hope. Until we know the pandemic's done, which we don't know when that'll be. So we need to put these things in place now.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Young. And thank you very much for your delegation.
Thanks. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank all the delegations tonight. Just to be clear, we hear you loud and clear, and the staff also hears you loud and clear. And I think that the director will have some words either at her briefing or later on with regards to some of the subject matter which you have touched on. So again, thank you very much. And at this point, we do have to move on in our agenda to item number 4, briefing from the chair. So go ahead, Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To start with, I'd like to make sure everybody is aware we are currently leading 2 important policy consultations. One of these focuses on developing an Ottawa-Carleton District School Board human rights policy. And a separate consultation is happening in support of our review of policy and practice with regard to police involvement in schools. Each of these consultations will include surveys, virtual focus group discussions, and larger virtual community meetings. More information will be shared with our communities as it becomes available. But when you have the information, we strongly encourage staff, parents, and community members to join the discussions and share their perspectives. Your voice matters. The other thing I'd like to highlight tonight is that we are hosting a speaker series on Black excellence. The discussions are intended for all parents, secondary students, and staff, and the sessions will be live streamed on YouTube. Participants are encouraged to share questions in advance to influence the discussions. The first session is on Wednesday, March the 10th, tomorrow, at 7 p.m. and it will focus on actions that we can take at the OCDSB to cultivate Black excellence. Please visit the OCDSB website to learn more about this. And that's everything in my briefing tonight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And do we have any questions for the chair on her briefing? Seeing none, I'd like to move on to our next item, and that's briefing from the director. Go ahead, Madam Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do have some briefing notes for the regular briefing. Item on the agenda is the COVID update, and the COVID update will contain a small a PowerPoint presentation, and it will also allow me, I noted the questions that the delegations brought. So in my comments in that update, I will be addressing some of the questions and the points made by our delegations with your indulgence. So I will begin with the regular update items. So to help prepare for to help prepare for the opening of the next school year, 2021-22, last week schools across the district sent families an online form to confirm whether they want their children to return to school for in-person or for virtual learning. We ask that parents discuss this with their children and complete the forms by the end of day Sunday, March the 14th. If families have not received or have this form or have questions, please contact your local principal. Later this month, the OCDSB will be launching our first all staff valuing voices staff equity engagement survey. The survey is voluntary, anonymous, and confidential. Participation will allow us to better understand the demographics and the engagement of staff. This information will guide strategies to support workplace inclusion as well as equitable practices, identify areas to improve staff engagement, and promote the health, safety, and well-being of all staff. So that's just to give you a sense of what's happening internally in the district. And I will turn now and ask Mike if you would put up the slides for the COVID update. And as that is opening up, I will begin my comments. So myself and Associate Director Reynolds will be sharing this piece of the agenda in terms of the COVID update. So I will ask you, Mike, if you would go to the first slide, please. So we do have some of the current realities identified in our update for tonight. We currently have 43 student cases and 9 staff cases across the district. And we have also seen an increase in students and staff on the do not attend list. And that is relevant simply because it goes to the scope of the contact tracing and the follow-up through public health. And it is the public health unit that identifies that list of people who need to remain at home. Could you go to the next slide, please, Mike? We also know, and we've heard through the news around the ministry initiative to advance further testing. And so we do have testing partnership with Ottawa Public Health, who is our lead in the district and in the area, not just for the OCDSB, but for all of the schools, the school districts in the Ottawa area around this testing initiative through the ministry. Ottawa area is unique in combining asymptomatic as well as symptomatic testing. So that has kind of moved beyond the expectation of the ministry. The yield on that assessment, that testing exercise has been low to date. What we are trying to do is we're trying to preserve time in schools as well to not be disruptive nor create congregations on school sites during the school day. And so this project is being undertaken at the end of the day, either evenings or weekends to date. You need to move to the next slide, please. And so the piece here that is worthy of note, and I have it in my notes as well and as on the screen, is just to ensure that our communities are aware that our trustees have written a letter and advocated actively for education workers to be early and prioritized in the rollout of the vaccine. We have heard from the ministry that the voices, not only OCDSB voices, but other trustees and boards have reached out, and that has been successful. And we do anticipate that our student-facing staff and our education workers, including bus drivers, will be included in phase 2 coming up in April. And so we do recognize that. In response to one of the delegates, one of our delegates did talk about advocacy and speaking to the ministry, not just on our behalf, but on behalf of all of our children. And I want to assure not only the delegate, but also our community that is listening, that indeed every measure is being taken to ensure that we are advancing this advocacy on multiple platforms. So our trustees have been very active in their advocacy, as the trustees have the ability to not only write letters, but there is a weekly communication with the Minister of Education, and that is a platform where every opportunity is being used to advance not only the piece around vaccination, but also the piece around increased stability and funding as necessary to support stability as we come into the new school year. Additionally, it is something that has been undertaken by the senior team and the Council of Directors of Education, myself included. We also use the platforms that we have to advance the voice of our community, as well as our students, around the needs for stability and the need for addressing the matters pertaining to mental health. At this point, what I would like to do is introduce the fact, and that was another key point raised by almost all of our delegates, is the significance of mental health and mental health impacts. And so I know I am going off script a little bit, but it was something that has been raised significantly enough that I think it deserves a segue. And we do have our own mental health lead with us. Dr. Dushner, Peter Dushner is with us, and we are able to speak to some of the things we are indeed doing. One of the things I think that we perhaps have not communicated well enough is the fact that we continue to be responsive as we learn. We have not simply sat by as we've learned things since September to now and left things status quo, that there have been initiatives and undertakings in order to address some of the emerging issues. So I do know that Dr. Dushner is with us, and Dr. Dushner, if you would join us on screen to speak a little bit to some of the undertakings that we have engaged in as a district to address the continuous and emerging needs and emergencies around our youth mental health. Dr. Dushner, please.
Thank you, Madam Director, and through you, Mr. Chair. I'm very happy to speak about this, and certainly let me start by saying that the impact on mental health has been significant, and it is undeniable that students across the district are experiencing more mental health challenges than ever in the past. And we see that not only in our school district, we see it across school districts across the province and nationally as well. We see it within the community. One of the delegates commented on the fact that the referrals to private practitioners and community agencies and hospitals have increased. We are certainly seeing the same sort of thing within our school district. I think it's important that we think about the fact that there is a range of impact. So families, students are differentially impacted. So although there is an overall increase, we know that there are some families and some students who are much more impacted than others. So when we think about a best practice perspective, it's really important that we consider the right amount of support, the appropriate support at the right time. The one thing that we really want to avoid when we're speaking with young people about mental health is pathologizing. We don't want to take an illness focus. We want to take a wellness focus. We want to focus on promoting mental health, sustaining mental health, because as we all know, we have mental health just as we have physical health. And so much of the work that we are doing is in the area of promoting mental health and really talking about what the 3 key factors are in promoting mental health. And those are maintaining social connections, having and practicing good habits, which involve sleep, getting out into fresh air, exercise, and regular meals. And the third area is maintaining as much structure and engaging in routines as possible, because that, as human beings, is how we best manage stress. The other piece is around supporting the learning around mental health, so student learning of mental health. And there has been explicit work done in terms of teaching students skills, particularly around stress management, and that work is ongoing. And recently it's intensifying, as the director has indicated, with us attempting to be as responsive as possible. We're intensifying that work through our partnership with School Mental Health Ontario, who have provided some ready-made resources and lesson plans for classroom teachers to work on with their students on specifically stress management and coping. So skills like deep breathing and muscle relaxation and changing thoughts, those kinds of things. Those are really critical pieces in terms of promoting mental health, which is prevention work, as well as early intervention. In addition to that, there are those students who need a higher level of support. And there we're looking at intervention. One of the delegates mentioned mental health coordinators. We have in every one of our schools social workers and psychology staff. And in our high schools, we also have child and youth workers to be able to support the individual needs of students. Those psychology and social work and child and youth work staff at the high school level are there to provide support for parents, consultation for staff in terms of being able to recognize some of the signs and symptoms of mental health challenges, to have conversations with students, to encourage them to seek help where they need to. They also provide individual support in the form of counseling and intervention, clinical intervention for those students. Another part, of course, is our partnership with the community. We work very closely with the mental health serving agencies within the Ottawa area, trying to facilitate where need be and streamline where need be referrals to community resources. I just want to add, in terms of funding, there was some funding from the ministry provided in September to support mental health as a result of the pandemic. And we at the OCDSB used that funding to enlarge our social work discipline. And in fact, we're able to hire 2.5 social workers, and 2 of those individuals were identity specific social workers. So we have one social worker who identifies as Indigenous, excuse me, and is able to support specifically the needs of our Indigenous students, and also a social worker who identifies as Black and who is able to work with our students who are Black. So we are certainly providing a range of services, recognizing that the needs are different for students. And certainly I would encourage families to reach out, speak to a caring, trusted adult at the school, whether that's the classroom teacher or an administrator at the school, in terms of being able to access the services of our mental health professionals in our schools.
Thank you, Dr. Dushner, and that covered off a number of pieces, not only the mental wellness piece, but also the intervention piece and the resources that we have in place. There is no question that as this pandemic wears on, if you will, we continue to learn more and hear more from our students about how structures impact them. So that is where I'm going to segue to the next item that was raised by a number of delegates pertaining to the proposed structure for the next school year. I'm very pleased to hear that the structure for elementary school, in fact, has been effective in many, many ways. That is what our data is telling us, and that is what our feedback is telling us as well, that the in-person structure is one that has, in fact, yielded positive results and has worked well for our students. The big question is, so why is it that we're not replicating the same thing at secondary for the coming year? So one of the things I want to clarify, and perhaps again, we take ownership for not having communicated this as clearly as we could have, is the fact that that indeed is our goal. We recognize that our middle school kids, our secondary school kids, they need to be at school. They need to be in school in person because that is the ideal way for them to learn. That they do need to be in school daily. And we have, without question, a clear understanding that the one course or one subject daily for every week for the Quadmaster, that is not an ideal scenario. And in fact, the recent results of our feedback from students has been that has really taken a toll and has worn very thin. So when we think about why it is then that we're communicating that we are going to be, or we are expecting to start the year that way next year. This is a worst case scenario, and I think one of the delegates did indicate that, that is worst case scenario. One of the things that's important, and it's important for me to reiterate this here, is that one of the key pieces around trying to recalibrate mental health, wellness, and a sense of control is predictability and stability. And one of the things that happened last year that really created a lot of instability in the system is not knowing how the year was going to begin and having to change and rechange and change again into more and more austere structures. So what we're working on and we're building from is what we know now, and anticipating that what we believe we will learn will move us into a better scenario. So one of the things, for example, is that we have heard recently, up until very recently, what we were hearing is vaccinations for all Canadian adults over 16 years old by the end of September. We are recently hearing an acceleration of that number, optimistically at the end of June, early July. And what that does is that it brings another layer of safety into the conversation. We're also hearing that there are clinical tests being undertaken over the summer. My last meeting told me July was when some of these clinical tests are happening for children who are under 16. And so if we see that that is going to be progressively uptaken, that optimistically, we may see a vaccine for children who are under 16 before the end of the calendar year. And that again is an optimistic piece. What we have already started to do is we've already started to have conversations with Ottawa Public Health about how it is that we may take the first layer, the first move, which is to go from a one-course model to a two-course model, because that is a key bone of contention and a key stressor. So that conversation has already started, and it is our hope that we will be able to announce that we will be able to start that way. We have maintained the notion of the cohort and the every other day alternating, because if it is that we learn, let's say in July, that we are able to bring students back to school together in a cohort of 25 or 28 at one time. That it's very easy to shift to that, and that goes to a good news. And so being able to say, if we get that information in time, that we will be able to shift that, we certainly will want to shift that, because that's what everybody wants. The students want that, their families want that, the teachers want that, and we know that it is in the best interest of our students. The next piece from a scaffolded point of view is, how do we move from quadmesters to semesters if we have set that up already? If we've set up quadmesters, a quadmester model, and we learn midsummer that there's no need to do that, it is again an easy shift to move to back to a semestered piece, slowing down the delivery of content, if you will. And so what I'm trying to describe here is the fact that we are anticipating the opportunity, as we learn more and get more advice medically, that we are able to release some of these restrictions and move us to a more normalized, if you will, circumstance. I do need to comment on the refrain, because we've heard it a lot, and I need to be just cautious about this data, that it has been an abysmal failure. I will say that some of the feedback from some of our students is that, in fact, the 2 course at a time model has actually been helpful to them. We have actually seen that in some of our most vulnerable schools, that credit attainment in the first semester, or the corollary to a credit failure, is the data that I have in front of me, is down by 5% compared to the same time in regular times, if you will, so that the credit failure has dropped, again, in some of our most vulnerable schools, and generally across the district has dropped by 3%. And so one of the things I want to reassure is that teaching and learning is continuing to happen, albeit at a social cost. And we do recognize, and again, there's no denying that there is a socio-emotional component that has been very challenging and detrimental, in fact, for some of our students. So I felt the need to insert that piece, because again, I don't want our community and our students, and thank you for recognizing the work of our educators, to believe that all is indeed lost. But it certainly is not ideal, and we do not wish to continue in this manner. Just want to make sure I've touched on all the points. The other piece that has been raised was around students who have special education needs, and students who have complex needs, as well, not mentioned, but mentioned in previous conversations to me, are students who have unique learning profiles who would typically access alternative programs. One of the things that we have been asked is, why is it that it is not being made available in a virtual setting? One of the things we do recognize, and we stated this 2 weeks ago, is that the virtual setting is a pandemic response. We do not intend, nor do we believe we are able to replicate every program. We do have 18 program types. We are not able to replicate all of them in a virtual setting. And so what we do want is to assure people of is the fact that we do realize that even where there are students who do require a virtual setting, that unique learning profiles, whether it's because of a special education need or other, because we do have children who have vulnerabilities, who do not have an identification, that unique learning profiles will be addressed in virtual, but not necessarily in the same way that they would be in person. We do recognize the limitations to our models. We do recognize that it isn't perfect, but we also recognize that the same supports from the ministry are not to be expected going into this year. And so we are planning prudently. The last comment I will make before I turn it over to Associate Director Reynolds is the question about looking at research and looking at what other districts have been doing, are doing, or contemplating doing. And indeed, that has been our focus. One of the things we recognize is that in our district, we have come out earlier than others because we do have timelines around staffing that we are obliged to maintain. But we are not the first district. We are also not the first district to ask parents to make a choice around the programming model. And what has gone unnoticed, perhaps because it's simply a part of our culture, is we typically make choices about our course selections at this time of year, every year, and for the same reason. The reason is staffing. We are looking at staffing 4,500 plus classrooms. And many of those classrooms, it's not simply a put people in a, we have a class, put people in it, but we have a variety of qualification requirements as well as obligations to our staff who may be declared redundant because to a school because the school has shifted in its enrollment. So it is a long and complicated undertaking to do. And so after we had discussions with multiple districts, some districts are not offering virtual opportunities at all. Some are offering virtual opportunities at secondary only, and some are very much like us. Some districts have already asked families to declare their decision and have closed that, and other districts have not yet opened it. So a variety of different approaches, and some districts like us are going to be starting the year at secondary with prudence. And we have been asked by the ministry to be prudent. Others are starting it more optimistically and hopeful, both of us recognizing that there's the possibility for change one way or the other, and everyone has agreed in person every day, secondary and elementary is the ideal way to go. So I'm hoping, I did jot notes as I was listening to everyone speak, and I am hoping that I was able to hit on responses to some of the questions. I am trying to be as reassuring as I can be, simply because what I do want the delegates as well as our community to hear is that we do hear what you're saying, and we believe not only is the impact for next year, so for some cases the impact is for now. And so some of our senior staff actually convened with a group of students last week, Thursday and Friday, to listen to some of the explanations around the why to some of the issues that are buzzing and coming up for them and creating challenges for them, to ask about what kinds of interventions and what kinds of things can we do now, even though we can't adjust the structure, what can we do within the content and within the context now to address student needs. And in fact, those students have themselves developed in the 6 OCV sites, have in fact developed local plans that are coming back to be delivered for their OCV sites, monitored through their SOI, the Superintendent of Instruction. So that is the base that I wanted to lay. And I'll turn it over to AD Reynolds, who will take us through the next few slides just around the feedback from the thought exchange. And then with your indulgence, Chair Penny, we are certainly welcome to take questions, and most of the senior team is here to be able to respond as well. So over to you, AD Reynolds.
Thank you very much. Mike, can you please advance the slides? So I'll try to go through this fairly quickly, as the information will be made available through the website for those that are interested in taking a deeper look at it. But we did do our second, surveying of students, staff, parents around their experience so far using thought exchanges we had in the past. And as one of the delegates had mentioned, it had recently closed in February. And so we asked a range of questions around such things as learning, engagement, safety, as well as providing some open-ended questions to help individuals share with us their experiences so far. Please advance. We saw decent participation. It had dropped off considerably since the October administration. But if you take a look at the actual number of ratings and thoughts shared, they're comparable. So we didn't hear from as many people, but we did hear a lot from the people that did participate, and we saw pretty significant participation from students, particularly in 7 to 12, and as well some of the parents, especially those that are learning in person. Please advance. So some of the highlights that came out through this most recent administration of the Thought Exchange Survey. 3/4 of our students reported being somewhat or very engaged in learning. Obviously there's a quarter there to help engage further, but at least we're seeing a fairly large return rate on people feeling engaged. About half of our students reported feeling heard, seen, or recognized when sharing thoughts and opinions in class. So there's some work to do there. And about 2/3 of our students reported poor overall well-being. So, kind of in the middle of the curve there. And again, as has been discussed at this point, an ongoing area of work for our staff to help support our students and our parents in supporting their children. Next slide, please. Most OCV parents and the majority of students reported it was easy or very easy to participate in online lessons. Most in-person parents and the majority of students were comfortable, very comfortable with the health and safety precautions taken in the school. Which we're glad to hear that that's being recognized. Obviously, the most important thing is keeping schools and classes open. Without schools and classes open, there is no in-person learning, regardless of what the structure is. We heard from staff, the majority feel engaged in their work. Educators are more likely to have concerns about safety than other employee groups, and the majority of staff reported fair or poor overall well-being. Again, something that we're hearing, fairly consistently across all groups throughout this pandemic. Please advance. There was quality feedback as well. The overall themes that emerged throughout the survey were gratitude, particularly on the part of parents, recognizing and appreciating the hard work of staff, especially educators. We heard that as well this evening. Communication and consultation, that people want to be heard and they want to see action taken as a result of the feedback that they provide. Well-being, feelings of stress, fatigue, anxiety, mental health concerns, certainly hard going through the winter, typically hard going through the winter in any year, but all the more so this year. Schedule, pace, and workload challenges, as we've heard a delegate speak of tonight, is challenging for some of our secondary students and staff. Some are experiencing greater success with it, but for many, it is certainly challenging. The need for more breaks. You think the moving of the spring break from March into April had a pretty significant impact on how people are feeling, in addition to other things. Increasing comfort with technology and safety is just always an emerging theme around PPE, challenges to distancing in classes, things of that nature. Please advance. So these are the types of detailed summary reports that can be found on the website. Students in OCV, students learning in person, parents of students, and it's a breakdown of some of the feedback we got into all these groups. And so those will be available shortly. I don't know if Executive Officer Giroux wanted to comment a little bit around the availability, if they're there now, or how people would find them, or if there's more information coming on that.
Just completed the preliminary analysis and are working to post that information. I know the team was working to post it today. I don't know if it's up yet or if it will be up tomorrow. We have parent messaging and student messaging going out this week, and the direct links will be included with that information.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So some of the next steps that we have are, sharing what we heard with the community, as discussed, so that they know that we have heard what they said. Define some actions that will be taken in response to what we have heard. That is ongoing work. Collaborate with respective departments, focusing on the relevant pieces of data, and engage with students, which we've already begun and is ongoing through a student voice initiative with continued use of Thought Exchange. Please advance. Planning for next year has already been discussed a fair bit this evening, and the director hit on a lot of the key things that are in the works. I think, again, just to reiterate, there's still a number of decisions to be made, particularly around what the secondary daily schedule and model will look like for September. Again, just to reiterate, what we have currently was revised heading into the school year based on some fairly explicit feedback from the Ministry of Education. But where it has been a success, we've seen very low rates of transmission in schools, and we've been able to keep students who are learning in person coming to school, except for the shutdown period. And, it would be great if we had 2 classes a day, but if we're seeing classes or schools closed, it doesn't really matter. So that's why, one of the successes that model has experienced. We are starting our thinking with the baseline of what we have now. That is in line with the most recent guidance from the ministry and our current reality. But as the director said, as new guidance from the ministry comes out, or as more learning occurs from Ottawa Public Health, we hope to very, safely yet steadily walk back some of these safety measures on our path towards returning to the normal in-person experience. And we can only hope that the community adherence to the public safety measures that are in place and their willingness to go and seek out a vaccination when the opportunity presents will help us to get there even faster. So that's all I have from my part, Director.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, just to conclude from the point of view of the planning and the continued conversation, is we recognize that this is a large volume of information. To be truthful, and it may surprise you, this is significantly scaled back from what we initially looked at, but we do recognize that trustees and the public need an opportunity to reflect, to see it, to reflect. And this is why it is being posted for the opportunity for folks to access it. And we have every intention of being able to return to you in board at the end of the month to be able to speak to you about some of the undertakings, actions and outcomes of what we have learned. Because one of the key things we heard from students is if you ask us, we expect to see something done with what you have shared. We have shared. And so we take that seriously, and we do anticipate that we will come back to this data and this information at the end of the month at board to follow up and to entertain emerging questions as you have had an opportunity to reflect on the data that you will be able to look at.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to open the floor to questions for the director on that a very informative briefing. Trustee Campbell, go ahead.
Thank you. Let me just say, first of all, how impressive that presentation was from both the director and the assistant director and others. Answered a lot of my questions. I guess, like talking to reassurances, I guess like a reassurance that for the small subset of students who have important health concerns, where it might be a doctor's recommendation, they really are advised to stay at home, but do have special education needs. As the director suggested, we would look at addressing those perhaps in a non-standard way. But can I get the assurance that however we address them, there'll be effectively equivalent richness of addressing, whatever those means may be, those alternate means of addressing them may be.
Trustee Campbell, that is a really good point and an important point for, again, some of our most vulnerable learners and families who rely on partnership with the school. And so, yes, indeed, we continue to look at very personalized approaches because it certainly is not a one size fits all. And so where it is that we know that there are certain structures that cannot be replicated in a virtual setting, we also know that we are equally obligated to work with these families and support. Superintendent Simmons has turned on his camera. That's usually an indicator for engagement. So I'm going to ask Superintendent Simmons to talk to some of the plans that his team in LSS have already started to undertake and reflect on. Superintendent Simmons, please.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. It won't be an equivalent way of meeting needs, but the needs will be met as documented in the individual education plan, the accommodations and modifications noted therein. And we are looking at staffing accommodations and allocating staffing in different ways to be able to meet those needs in this different format of learning for those learners who might otherwise have had service in-person specialized program classes, for example. We will be leveraging central supports as well as a couple of other things that we're going to be talking about a little bit later in the staffing report to help augment supports for students who are learning virtually. We're anticipating, and we learned this year, that most students learn best in an in-person model, but we are acutely aware of taking steps to try to support students who need to learn virtually, as you indicated.
Great, thank you. Just a quick follow-up there. I get it that the means may not be equal or the same, and that staff are mobilizing supports, but are we confident, or is that a question, that we will be able to as adequately address student needs in these particular circumstances as we might have otherwise if they had been in person? Whatever the means used, we'll be able to hit the same mark, broadly speaking.
So very broadly speaking, yes. For example, some students require hand-over-hand modeling, which our staff can't do in a virtual environment. But we will work collaboratively with families and caregivers and the supports that families have in place to try to create programs that will address those needs as directly as possible.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. And we have Trustee Fisher.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. And I certainly want to echo Rob's comments about the presentation. I thought that was just fantastic. And in fact, I think from agenda planning standpoint, Lynn, that presentation combined with the academic staffing plan we're about to see tonight, plus the plan that we saw last week on the planning for 2021, that would have made for a nice agenda because there was so much context and considerations in all three of those reports. It's too bad we couldn't have all of that on one night. I guess the question I have for you, Camille, is I know that the board, you and Brett, are talking regularly with OPH about how they're feeling about the pandemic right now, how they're feeling about the pandemic in September. What continues to be a bit of a mystery for me is where the ministry, where the province is at with its own thinking. I know that there are different expert tables that are set up. What are you hearing from the ministry about their own planning? Because obviously, as we saw last summer into the fall, we can expect directives to come from them directly, right? That will shape some of our own planning. So what are you hearing in terms of their own decision-making, their own planning? Have they set up, can we expect certain gates that, they set for themselves 3 months, 4 months, where there might be some decision points about how they feel about the education sector writ large? And what directives they might push out the board in terms of our own planning. What are you hearing from the province, from the ministry?
Thank you, Trustee Fisher, and through you, Chair. So indeed, I think the tone and the conversation at the ministry tables is different from the one last year. I think that we can see even over the winter that there's a recognition that one thing for everyone does not work. And I use the example for students with special education needs when we had the edict of a closure, an extended winter break, that the ministry indicated an exception and an opportunity for students with special education needs to return to school, even though lockdowns had been imposed. Because for some students, access to learning was virtually impossible in a totally virtual way. And so we see that is a shift and a response to new learning as this pandemic situation has unfolded. We continue to hear that responsiveness in some of the conversations. And one of the key things where I believe that there is some optimism is that we've heard repeatedly from the minister himself the commitment to a more timely rollout of the grants for student needs, the GSNs, to inform some of our budget understanding so that we are able then to make plans in a more constructive way. That said, we have also heard from the ministry that the overlays of funding that were provided last year to address gaps created or challenges created by the COVID situation, that we are not guaranteed to see those same financial supports in the GSNs that are rolled out in April. And therefore, we are expected to plan prudently and plan with caution from the point of view of not kind of expecting a whole lot of influx of funds. So those are some of the key pieces. From the point of view of guidelines, operational guidelines, what we have done, and I know I've done it personally as well as other directors and other members of these conversation tables, is to indicate that there is a level of prudence that we are planning to start with. So I know that in recent conversations I've raised that we are looking at starting with some of the more the last set of operational guidelines we've received, i.e. cohorts and so on and so forth. Is there any advice at this point about whether or not we should change that approach? And the position of the ministry is that it is wise to start prudently, but that further information will be coming. And I can anticipate that there will be a range and a scope that we are provided because our reaction to the pandemic situation and to the spread is not the same from region to region. And we can see that the ministry has started to take a very differentiated approach because every region is not having the same experience. So that's what we're hearing. I think the key message there, Trustee Fisher, is that the ministry has recognized the importance of timing because that is what has, I talked about stability and predictability, that created an unstable and unpredictable situation last year that we are trying to avoid. And I believe the ministry has heard us on that particular point.
That's great. Thank you. And I certainly support a differentiated approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Fisher. Moving on to Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wonder, in terms of the support for special education, if staff could please elaborate a little bit on the support that will be available to our virtual schools that we will have next year, particularly because we have an awful lot of students with special needs who are, in fact, most of our students with special needs are integrated in regular classes. And last year, they were still being supported by their in-person school teams, but I understand it's going to be different, and I would like some clarification on that.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. I will ask Superintendent Simmons to undertake that question.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. For our students who are learning in remote classrooms next year, we are looking at allocating LST, LRT, and educational assistance support directly to OCV in order to allow for a more seamless connection to those kinds of supports. We are also looking at some additional support through our academic staffing report this evening that will allow us to more personalize support for some specific areas, specific profiles of student need. So things like ASD and learning disability in our regular classrooms. So there are some different pieces being brought into place to try to shift the level of support that we are providing both in person and virtually.
Thank you for that. That's good to hear. And just to comment in terms of putting these reports together, I think I have to echo what my colleagues have said about the quality and thoroughness of tonight's presentation. I'm afraid, though, that if we had tried to combine the previous report on the planning for the return in September with this report and the staffing report, we would be well advised to be bringing our pajamas to this meeting. And as much as I would love to do it all on the same night, it just really isn't practical because we do have a lot of questions. We had a good number of delegations tonight, and there is a limit to how late we can remain awake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And moving on to Trustee Lyra.
So thank you for the report. I have one quick question. I've had a number of community members reach out and ask us what we are planning to do or what parameters we are planning to use to determine what our masking policy is going to be for the next school year.
Thank you, Trustee Lara, through you, Chair. I'll ask Adie Reynolds if that conversation has been tabled at this point, as I'm not sure I've heard a change, but Adie Reynolds, would you kindly take the question?
Sure, thanks. So as you know, through this year, our masking policy has been at the direction of the province, both the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education, with some variants locally would allow us to really go beyond what direction the province has set. We don't know yet if there will be provincial direction for next year that would also govern whatever our policy is towards masking. You know, at present, we're seeing the emergence of variants of concern in our neighborhoods, and the spread is still as much a concern now as it has been throughout this year. Again, we're hoping to see some things change as vaccination programs roll out, but you know, I think to answer your question, it's too early to know what our masking direction will be going into September. And because it's a certain thing going into September doesn't mean that it doesn't change for October or doesn't change for January, depending on how circumstances evolve. But as soon as we're aware of whatever, you know, guidance we're going to be working within, we'll communicate at what our whatever the direction we need to follow will be.
I suppose my question could have been better phrased. What parameters would we use to decide that we are going to go above and beyond the provincial minimum requirements for masking?
Typically, where districts have gone above and beyond the provincial requirements, it's been at the encouragement of their local public health unit. We rely heavily on their advice and guidance as they are the health experts. And so if they were making those recommendations, I think they would have to be brought forward for serious consideration. At this time, they are not.
All right, thank you.
And thank you very much, Trustee Lyra. And we have Ms. Mullison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to touch on the briefing and the report that was just brought forward by the director, as well as some of the delegates, and just some of their concern. And I know there's some other parents that have reached out with concern about the staffing report and program changes coming in the fall. And the board did a great job with the strategic plan last time in reaching out to parents and talking about the culture of innovation and the culture of caring and equity and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of people who are concerned that there's going to be a lack of equity between what's going to be offered to the virtual students and what's going to be offered to the in-person students. And I want to make sure that everyone is keeping that in mind when we're looking at the programming, when we're looking at staffing. I understand funding is going to be difficult. That's not, you know, we're not arguing that. But we want to make sure that for whatever reason, when we do have, you know, students that are stuck at home and have to be at home for legitimate reasons, are getting the exact same right and access to the same education that the other kiddos are getting when they're in the brick and mortar schools. It's not, I don't think it's fair to ask that they get a subpar education. They don't get the same programming, they don't get the same aids, they don't get the same help. So wanting to keep that in mind when we're looking at the staffing report and that sort of thing, and when we're discussing where those allocations go and keeping those families in mind. Thank you.
Okay. Was there a response to that, Madam Director?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Certainly, we have positioned equity as a central piece to our thinking. We are always careful when we talk about words like equivalent and same, because we recognize that that means different things to different people. What we do recognize is that when it is that we are saying that we have a student with particular learning profiles that look that personalize their needs, that just because we're not offering exactly the same structure doesn't mean that we are not personalizing our service or constructing a service to meet those students' needs. And so I think that that is where the caution is, that we are not trying to, and I've made it very clear, and I will say it again, that the offering of the virtual option is for the purpose of accommodating a need, and that we would tailor and structure our service within that accommodation to meet the needs of the students. It is not intended to replicate our in-person and personal offering, because that is simply not feasible to do.
Okay, thank you very much. And moving on to Miss Lamba.
Oops. Okay, I have just a couple questions, and it's sort of related to some comments by the delegation. It's related to the mental health services that are available now for students who need it. I'm like, it's great that there's these resources that were mentioned that are available, but my question really is, has that actually been communicated to parents? And I can tell you, having a child, I haven't really seen that there are these resources available in his school, for example. That hasn't been communicated. So what has been the method of that communication? And then my question around that is it actually being used? Are we seeing students using those mental health resources? And then the second, like that's part two, but in the third part to a question that I have is, I did hear that there were these teachers could access lesson plans in classrooms. So I would like to know how that is being used. Are teachers accessing it? Who's accessing it? Is it secondary? Is it elementary? Is it in a biology class? Like, how is that being used? Because I think that's important. If students in their classrooms, whatever grade, can have some information around how they could be doing, things around their mental health, that might be helpful in the preventative, stages. And then like the communications if people need more. But so that's kind of my essence of my questions.
Thank you. Those were lots of questions, but same theme. So I will turn to, we do have Dr. Duchner still here with us. So I will just skip directly to Dr. Duchner, and Superintendent Simmons may have some additional comments. Dr. Duchner, please. You're muted.
You're muted, Dr. Duchner. Still muted, sorry. There.
That's better, right? Thank you. There were quite a few questions there. I think I noted them all, but please let me know if I missed something. So with respect to your first question, in terms of communication to parents about the services that are available, there are different methods that are used to provide that information for parents, certainly through newsletters and information sent directly from the school. Information is shared. There is information on our board website. We have a mental health page, and the resources are described there, both internal OCDSB resources, but also community resources, and how to access those resources are described there. In terms of uptake, we certainly have no shortage of referrals for our social work, psychology, and child and youth work staff. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, the need is significant, and when we look at the number of referrals, we're seeing about a 20 to 30% increase in the number of referrals to our clinical staff this year. In terms of those lesson plans, those ready-made resources that are available for teachers, they come from a group known as School Mental Health Ontario, and they're an implementation team that helps to support the mental health work that's done in school districts. And so the information regarding the School Mental Health Ontario, the website and so on, is shared directly with schools. In different ways. It's shared at principal meetings, it's shared in memos, as well as various newsletters that are sent directly out to schools. And we encourage both elementary and secondary teachers to take a look at those resources for those lesson plans that are specific to stress management, but there are also some lessons, some activities that are specific to maintaining mental health. So really pertaining to how best to sustain mental health through challenging times. I think I covered most of them.
Okay. Can I do a follow-up on that? Just for some clarifications or no?
If we could, we really have to get to our academic staffing, so please make it quick.
I was just going to say, I would recommend, if it's at the discretion of the teacher or the principals, I don't think in some cases it's getting out to the parents or the students. So I think better communication where it really needs to get out to there. I did see something coming from the district, the school newsletter about community resources, but nothing in the school. So there needs to be better communication directly to parents and students in some way. That's just my thought on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I just like to remind everyone, just please make your questions as quick as possible. I hate to rush, but we do have a rather large item remaining. So with that, we'll move on to Trustee Bell.
Thank you very much, and through you, Chair. My question has to do with that we're not to expect the type of funding from the Ministry of Education as we received over the past year for COVID. Now, you mentioned in the overview that we received 2 additional mental health supports via that funding. Can you please give us a quick rundown of what are the types of supports and services that have come from the additional funding that we are not to expect continuing and going forward into the next school year? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So in the interest of being expeditious, I'll give an overview piece. I'm not sure if I see CFO Carson here who may add a few pieces if I miss them, but I will try to be as efficient as I can be. Just to start with the mental health piece, Trustee Bell, one of the things that the Minister has spoken to regularly is the continued support for mental health. So the recognition that coming out of this situation, that mental health gaps will continue to be a reality. There has been allusion to the fact that that will continue to be prioritized, but we don't know what that will look like from a financial point of view. Similarly, the Minister has talked about the fact that there is recognition that there will be not only expectations to support gaps that have emerged in learning because of this scenario, and allusion has been made to some expanded summer opportunities, as well as assessment and learning coming up into the spring or into the fall rather, and recognition that we will be rolling out a de-streamed mathematics curriculum, and so there will be resources that will be attached to that. So there have been allusions to these priority items where it is that we can expect some changes and some perhaps we won't. This has been explicitly talked about, is the fact that we did have last year a recognition within the year that our projections for enrollment, which are the foundation for the grants for student needs, GSNs, was much lower. The actual enrollment was lower than the projections. And so there was some funding provided within the year to help to stabilize the budgets for districts across the province, and that we have been directed not to expect. We are expected to now understand that our enrollment will probably be lower than it has been before, and to build on the reality of our most recent enrollment. And so that part of the support is unlikely to be present. I will remind the trustee and all trustees that the ticket for our district in terms of the outlay from the ministry was something in the area of $20 million last year. I think that it's safe to say that we cannot expect that. Where it is that had been applied in certain circumstances was to enhance staffing and support some staffing decisions that allowed us to address the pandemic needs. We do not have a guarantee that will continue. There is the possibility that with the prioritization of the items that I outlined earlier, that we may see something in what we call transfer payment agreements, where it is project-based. But even that, at this point, it's too early to make any guaranteed statements about that. I will turn to CFO Carson at this point. If I've missed any, if I've made any glaring errors or made some big gaps there that you may want to cover, CFO Carson.
No, I think Mr. Chair, the director has covered some of the challenges we've got with the money. Obviously, as we go further into the year, just like last year, I think we'll hear changes into where there may be additional dollars. The trustee was asking about what were those dollars being used for. I think we've reported on that elsewhere, but really it was to provide staff in a number of areas, whether it was in our professionals, paraprofessionals, teaching staff, custodial positions. It allowed us to manage the acquisition of significant amounts of technology to assist with the remote learning. And it also gave us some flexibility, as the director mentioned in the fall, to where we chose not to reorganize classes. So it was across the board, and the most current direction from the ministry is to plan for a normal year. There's no doubt we will see changes to that, but it's too early for us to predict where those changes will be. Thank you.
Thank you. And just in quick follow-up, what about PPE and cleaning supplies? Was that also part of the funding?
Mr. Chair, was the approximately 65 positions, I believe, the additional positions that we put into schools during the daytime for cleaning. PPE, the biggest chunk of that is being funded directly ministry to ministry. We've heard that the ministry understands some of that will need to continue, but we've had there's been no confirmation of in what form and in what amounts. So that's still outstanding at this time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Trustee Bell. And again, please try to make everything brief, but go ahead, Trustee Jenkins.
Thanks, Chair Penny. My question is in regards to our registration timeline for our families. We're asking families to make decisions for September right now. And our elementary students and their families recently received a communication, and in that communication there was a section where we are asking them to make a year-long commitment. So families are struggling with that, considering still we don't have certainty of when everyone's going to be vaccinated. But in particular, I have been speaking with a family whose child has medical issues. And so they're looking for more flexibility. They'd love for their child to be in class, because as we know, students do benefit from in class, but they'd like that flexibility to switch back to virtual if the medical issues do become apparent where in class is no longer feasible. We are offering a case by case, I guess we can look at, but can we offer a little bit of assurance to our families that we will have some sort of flexibility?
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you, Trustee Jenkins, for the question. It certainly is a question that has come up more than once. I'd like to say that the OCDSB is one of few districts across the province that has taken a very careful approach to that shifting back and forth from virtual to in person, and because of that, we have been, for the most part, being able to meet the needs of families as requests come, but being able to maintain the stability of the organization. When we talk about the, when we get to our staffing report, and I mentioned it in my earlier comments, that we are talking about the staffing of over 4,000 classes, right? And we shared with trustees in our last attempt to share information that when we have to reorganize a system, what it means is new classes, new schools in some cases, that teachers are moved, that students have different teachers and different friends and so forth. So we are really trying to ensure the stability of the organization. That said, we recognize that people's situations change. And so over the course of this year, where that has occurred, we actually did get to a point of, at one point, I'm not sure if we're still there at this point, but 0 people on the wait list for the virtual, those people who wanted to go to virtual. And although the transfer from virtual into bricks and mortar, we cannot say that it is seamless and easy and timely, but we can say that we have been working steadily with families. When families do decide that the circumstances have changed and students who, for example, are in virtual need to come back into bricks and mortar, there is a process for that, just like when there are requests for a change in program or a shift in school or whatever, and we have to look at space. We have to look at time, we have to look at appropriateness, and so we work with the families directly. So as I said earlier, we certainly do make every effort to be as responsive as we can be, but we are also balancing the stability of the organization because a part of our research was such that districts that offered multiple opportunities for system-wide change saw up to 3 reorganizations of the entire system during the school year. And that the lesson learned out of that is most districts that we spoke to are not anticipating reprising that exercise because of the significant impact it has right from the district level into the classrooms, into the homes and playgrounds of our students.
Thank you.
Thank you. And last question before we have a quick break, and that's going to Mr. Lesage.
Thank you, Chair. Brian Lesage, elementary teachers. Speaking to the issue of mental health as the board makes decisions for planning for next year, from an elementary teacher's perspective. Elementary teachers would report that in virtual settings, they are teaching to classes of 36, or in some very rare cases, 37. To, in some cases, cameras off, mics off, not necessarily knowing who is behind the blank screens and if that is being recorded. They would report anxiety about possible incidents or emergencies and not being able to intervene or summon help in a virtual setting. Everything in virtual takes longer. Teachers, for the first time, are teaching and planning and preparing in a mode of instruction that in most cases they've never had to deal with before. And they're doing it for the first time. Everything is taking longer. All of this makes elementary teachers pleased with and supportive of the board's decision to prioritize a return as fully and as quickly as possible to in-person learning. We do also note, and it's been stated here earlier, that this board is one of the only, if not the only board that did not have at least one, and in many cases, multiple reorganizations. That commitment to stability and predictability was helpful. In a year of so much turmoil, that helped. And we would encourage the board to continue to prioritize that predictability and stability as we go forward. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Mr. Lesage. I really appreciate those words. And with that, we're going to take a 5-minute break to take care of whatever, and be back. And we're going to talk about academic staffing. So we'll see everyone back here at 9:17, say between 9:17 and 9:20. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Trustees, if you could turn your cameras on so that I can see if we have quorum. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, let us continue. There's just three quick housekeeping items we get before we get to the main event. And so I'd like to call for a mover to confirm the Advisory Committee on Equity minutes of January 28th, 2021. Trustee Jenkins, thank you very much. And are there any errors and or omissions to this report? And seeing none, I'd like to call the question on this. All those in favor of the report, receiving the report? And opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. And I'd like to call for a mover to confirm receipt of the Audit Committee report of February the 17th, 2021. Trustee Schwartz, thank you very much. Are there any changes and or omissions to this report? Errors and or omissions? Trustee Blackburn? Errors and or omissions, Trustee Blackburn?
Mr. Chair, my attendance wasn't recorded.
Okay. So Executive Officer, you will note that and make a correction.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't unmute. Yes, I will.
No problem. Thank you very much. And any other errors and or omissions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on receipt of that report. All those in favor? And opposed? Thank you very much. And the last one for that, no, I guess that's, the Advisory Committee on Equity minutes of January 20th, 2021. Can I have a mover to confirm receipt of those minutes? Trustee Bell, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions to the Advisory Committee on Equity minutes of January 28th? And seeing none, I'd like to call a question on that. All those in favor of receipt? And opposed? And thank you very much. That passes. And then moving on to our amended agenda and moving to report 21-029, academic staffing plan for the 2021-2022 school year, and turning it over to the director. Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So we've had quite a bit of lead up already around the context of this particular item. So I'd like to pass it directly to Superintendent McCoy to take us into that report so that we will have adequate time for questions. So over to you, Superintendent McCoy.
Thank you, Director, and through you, Mr. Chair, if I could ask Mike to share his screen and the presentation. Okay, next slide. So we're pleased to be bringing forward this evening for trustee consideration and discussion the academic staffing plan for the 2021-2022 school year. As trustees are aware, the approval of the academic staffing plan represents a significant part of the approval of the board's budget each year. It represents the first major decision that the board makes as part of its annual budget cycle. As part of its role, ensuring that the recommendations that are being brought forward from staff and ultimately approved are aligned with achieving the board's priorities around student achievement and well-being, and of course, meeting legislated and collective agreement requirements. The approval of academic staffing is significant in that it represents about 60% of the board's overall operating budget. And senior staff is certainly cognizant that the recommendations that we bring forward can also impact on the decisions that the board can make as part of the budget process, in that committing resources at this time can impact the flexibility that the board has in making decisions later on. Once approved, the senior staff's role is then to ensure that the resources that are approved are allocated effectively across all of our schools and departments, and again, specifically tied to meeting the board's priorities. It's the role of principals then, once they receive their allocation of staff, to create the conditions that are required to meet student achievement and well-being goals, and to ensure that the resources are used effectively within their schools through the staffing assignments that are made. Next slide. So again, just to reiterate that the academic staffing plan includes all of the teaching positions that are in place in the board, including the school supports, and that would include not only classroom teachers, but also the other school supports, which include teachers who support English as a second language learning, our teacher librarians in our secondary schools, guidance counselors, our student success teachers, both the intermediate level and in our secondary schools, as well as our school-based special education teachers, our learning resource teachers and learning support teachers, and teachers who are assigned to our specialized program classes. In addition to the teaching positions at schools, we're also bringing forward this evening our recommendation for principals and vice principals. Although we don't have a requirement to bring those forward at this time, it's been our practice, given that the allocation of vice principals, particularly when they have teaching assignments, is tied very closely to the allocation of our teachers to schools. In addition to our school-based supports, of course, we have system-level teaching positions. We have a number of itinerant central supports. For example, our teachers who are assigned to our Learning Support Services Department, but are itinerant in that they support our students who with hearing, who are deaf and hard of hearing, or who have visual impairment. As well as other itinerant teachers of ESL who support directly students who are in our schools. We also have system level supports in our instructional coaches, whose role it is to lead the development and implementation of a curriculum and to support capacity building of their colleagues who work in schools directly with our students. And as well, our learning support consultants who work in learning support services. The approval of our other staffing areas. So for example, our educational assistants, our custodial staff, our central department staff are all part of the recommendations that are brought forward later this spring with the staff recommended budget. Next slide, Mike. So what informs the decisions that around academic staffing in terms of the recommendations that are brought forward? Well, of course, the current strategic plan and the work that's involved in the strategic plan. So part of the deliberations and discussion that senior staff has is looking ahead to see what is the work that is required to meet the objectives in the strategic plan, and what are the resources that we currently have in place to support that work. Do we need to bring forward recommendations for increases in any particular areas? Are there resources in place that can be reallocated to different areas? Can we reprioritize the work in some of our schools and departments so that the work is tied more closely to the strategic plan priorities. So I've identified some of the areas that are part of our discussions, in that they reflect the work that is happening now around the strategic plan, and to give you a sense of some of the discussions that have been happening. So we know, for example, that last year, as part of the academic staffing plan that was brought forward, there were investments made in the area of innovation and learning, and as well there were investments in adding coaches to support mathematics and literacy. This year, there are relatively few changes being brought forward in terms of our discretionary staffing, on the basis that in most areas, senior staff's view was that there are sufficient resources in place, or there are still some areas where although there may be additional resources required, there are opportunities for reallocating or reprioritizing the work in other areas. In addition to the strategic plan, compliance is also a significant factor in terms of informing academic staffing. The collective agreements set out staffing formulas, but also set out other provisions related to workload and preparation time that impact on academic staffing levels. And of course, there are regulatory and legislative requirements. So the class size regulation, which I'll talk about in a minute, has a significant impact in terms of determining the number of classroom teachers that are required. But in addition to that, Regulation 298 under the Education Act is also relevant in that it provides guidelines around the size of our specialized program classes based on the particular exceptionality of the students being served. And so again, those are important considerations as we look at our academic staffing requirements for the upcoming year. Next slide. So the current class size regulation, and trustees will be familiar with this, sets out specific requirements with regard to all grades from kindergarten through to grade 12, and provides either or both of a maximum average class size that's required to be met, or specific class size caps. So for example, at kindergarten, there's a maximum board-wide average class size of 26 that must be maintained, as well as a maximum class size a maximum class size of 32 for individual classes. This plays a significant role in terms of our planning for academic staffing, in that we need to ensure that we are able to comply with achieving all of these class size averages or maximum class sizes based on the enrollment projections for the upcoming year in each of these areas. Next slide. So just before I move on, actually, as the largest portion of our academic staffing is generated from the as a result of the class size regulation, we use the projected enrollment both at elementary and at secondary to determine how many classes will be required in order to meet those. And as the director indicated earlier, next year we're projecting a need for over, I think it's around 3,700 classes, both at elementary and at secondary. Other considerations, in particular this year, OCV and the need to staff our virtual campuses. This year, with the opportunity to do some advanced planning for the campuses, we anticipate that we will be able to staff them by allocating staff from the overall complement, but recognizing that there will be some additional pressures created as a result of that in some areas. This year, as we staffed them, as we went into the new school year, it made things difficult in terms of ensuring that we were staffing them appropriately, and then we're required to, in some cases, follow up and supplement the staffing. We are looking carefully at what the requirements are based on our experience this year, so that we can ensure that our planning includes consideration of the particular needs of the virtual campuses as we move forward. Funding is always a consideration. As was already mentioned, this year as we look forward, we're aware of the ministry's direction that indicates that school boards should be planning for next year without counting on the additional dollars that were provided for COVID-related measures, which included funding for some additional teaching positions, particularly in our elementary schools, in order to provide smaller classes, but also which were used to support our virtual schools and the hybrid model for our specialized program classes. In terms of enrollment, we continue to be concerned about the uncertainty related to enrollment projections. We know that this year's enrollment was significantly lower than what was projected at this time last year. There's still some uncertainty in terms of whether or not, for example, some of our international students will be able to return next year, whether parents who made decisions to homeschool children or to defer kindergarten will feel confident returning next year. Our projected enrollments are outlined here, so 24,600 secondary and almost 50,000 for elementary. And while those projections are above what our actual enrollments are for this year, they are still below what we were projecting at this time last year for the current school year. And finally, another consideration, which has already been touched on tonight, so I won't go into it, but is the need for trying to maintain stability, and that includes planning to mitigate any unnecessary instability to the extent possible as we move forward with staffing. Next slide. So the staffing cycle is really a year-round process, and although much of it takes place between March and the end of June, it's really happening all year. For example, for the last few weeks, senior staff with members of different central departments have been meeting, and principals have been meeting on a regular basis. We're now meeting weekly to talk about planning for elementary and secondary. Much of the discussion of late has included planning for the staffing process, including looking at the enrollment projections, looking at the process for collecting information from parents about their intentions next year, and looking at the information that's required so that we can move forward with staffing and how it's going to be impacted by a number of the considerations that I've already touched on. Next slide. So again, just to give a sense of the staffing process. So as I said, it's been underway already in terms of looking at the enrollment projections for next school year, which are developed by planning and then shared with human resources for purposes of determining the staffing complement. We're currently bringing forward the plan to be approved by the end of March, which will then allow human resources working with our central departments to allocate the approved teaching positions to our schools. There are collective agreement requirements, which we have included on this slide. So for example, under the elementary teachers collective agreement, we are required to provide the allocations by April the 7th to the Federation and then by the 15th to the schools. Based on the OSSTF collective agreement, we are required to provide those allocations by April the 12th. So once the allocations are provided, principals are then involved in the complex work of building their tentative school organizations, making teacher assignments, and determining teachers within their building who may be surplus. And again, there are specific dates in our collective agreement for those determinations and for sharing that information with teachers before we get into the internal transfer and placement process that takes us through May and into June, when we are doing our external hiring of both our permanent contract positions and our long-term assignments, and determining whether or not any teachers are redundant to the system, and again, subject to the timelines that are set out in our collective agreement. Next slide. So what does staffing a school involve? And again, just to touch on some of the things that our principals are involved in once the allocations are provided. So as I say, creating classes and timetables. So determining how many classes they need within their school in each grade level, whether they will be single or combined grades. And again, taking into consideration what those class size caps are for kindergarten and primary. At secondary, taking into consideration what the course offerings will be, how many sections they need, and based on student option sheets, but also taking into consideration the class size caps that are in our collective agreement. Creating teacher assignments driven by the best possible program for students, also taking into consideration teacher qualifications and preferences, collective agreement parameters like preparation time and workload. Identifying based on, after doing all of that, which teachers in their school, if any, are maybe surplus to the school, and communicating that to the teacher and to human resources. And then participating in the internal transfer and placement process to fill any vacancies that they may have in their school through the posting and interview process, and then filling their remaining permanent and long-term vacancies. The assignment of classrooms and portables, and then monitoring enrollment and class sizes so that any changes can be communicated, and any impact on the original or tentative school organization can be realigned to reflect the changes in enrollment. Next slide. So again, given the number of programs and school configurations, excuse me, adds to the complexity of the process that our principals undertake in terms of organizing schools. We recognize that we have a number of programs, each of which is valuable and valued by our community, but can create staffing pressures. All of our classes, regardless whether they are small classes or larger classes, require the same resources in terms of the 1.2 at elementary FTE teachers that are assigned to cover the full instructional day. Next slide. And again, I know you won't be able to see this, but again, just a typical K-8 elementary school that is dual track, early French immersion and English with core French with one specialized program class and an enrollment of 561 students. After considering staffing for each of the two programs within the school and the specialized program class, taking into consideration the class size provisions, and preparation time, the total staff allocated to that school would be 33.82 FTE. And then from that, the principal undertakes the work involved in building a timetable for the following school year. Next slide. And similarly, a sample secondary school where there are 5 specialized program classes and an enrollment of 1,000 students from grades 9 to 12 with ESL and ELD programs and both French immersion and core French would generate 81.33 staff to meet the students' needs in that school. Next slide. So brings us to the proposed plan for next year that we are bringing forward. So looking at the elementary academic staffing plan for next year, based on the projected enrollment and the class size provisions, the plan includes approximately 2,500 FTE classroom teachers, which represents a reduction of 81 from the a plan that was approved at the same time last year. And that is directly tied to changes in enrollment. In addition to our classroom staffing, we are recommending the continuation of the 20 student success teachers, which are provided based on specific funding from the ministry. and no changes to our current complement of ESL teachers, which includes both our itinerant and our school-based ESL, and as well teachers who support our congregated ELD classes. There's an additional positions that are provided through the Support for Students Fund, which was provided as part of the resolution of the Central Collective Agreement with ETFO. In total, our board is allocated funds sufficient to provide 21 FTE. Some of those positions, some of that funding has been allocated to maintain positions which were previously added from similar funding that was provided from the last collective agreement, and which have been maintained, and which this funding will allow the board to continue to maintain in areas that include ESL and special education, and as well supporting the Indigenous education itinerant teacher. So that leaves 10.5 additional positions, which we will be allocating again in a way that best supports student needs and aligns with the district's priorities, based on consultation as well with ETFO. We have not had a chance to engage in conversation with them yet about how best to allocate those positions for next year. So we will be doing that in the coming weeks before the allocations are made to schools. In the area of special education, we're bringing forward a plan that includes 451.1 FTE teaching positions, which represents an overall increase of 1.76. You'll see that it includes an increase of almost 5 FTE in the area of specialized program classes. And that is specifically as a result of changes that are being recommended by Learning Support Services to reduce a couple of specialized program classes, but then to add in other areas. It also reflects the change in delivery for our LD SIP classes, a continuation of the way in which those classes were delivered this year, as a result of the need to cohort those students. They are normally integrated for part of the day. However, because of the need to cohort, they were remained congregated for the full day. And so while we normally allocate additional positions to support the integration of those students, next year we will be reinvesting those positions to support maintaining those classes as congregated classes. No change in terms of what's being recommended for our learning support teachers. In the area of LRT, you'll see that there's a net reduction of 5.5. However, it should be noted that 3.5 of FTE, again, are being reinvested to support the LD SIP classes. Normally, we have, since the introduction of that delivery model, allocated an additional 0.5 LRT to the schools that host those LD SIP programs, and to support the integration of those students. Next year, because we anticipate that they will be congregated, we are reallocating those LRTs to the same schools, but rather than serve as an LRT, they will be supporting the students as a classroom teacher. No change to the social emotional learning teachers. We'll maintain 3 for next year. Learning Support Services has or is bringing forward a recommendation to increase the complement of teachers who are itinerant and support our students who identify as deaf and hard of hearing or blind and low vision. And specifically, the additional 0.5 would be allocated to support students who are blind or have the low vision. In the area of learning support consultants, we're bringing forward a recommendation to increase by 2. And again, that is a reallocation of the LRT. So if we look again a net reduction of 5.5, 3.5 of which will be reinvested to support the LD SIP classes. That's reflected in the 4.76 increase to specialized program classes, and the balance of 2 reinvested to the central LSC complement. Superintendent Simmons referred earlier to the additional supports that were being brought forward in terms of an itinerant to support students who are in the regular program who have ASD, or students who are being returned to the regular program from the LD SIP program next year, but who, because of the need to cohort this year, did not have opportunities for integration. And so the one of the 2 positions being recommended will support the reintegration of those approximately 40 students next year. There are no changes being recommended to our central complement. As I said earlier, there was an investment last year of 4 additional instructional coaches. There is a plan to reallocate 2 central positions to support the SATE program, which is a Student Achievement Through Equity program, and we provided a description in the report. It's a pilot program to support a specific group of schools who have been identified based on needs, and specifically the initiative seeks to create optimal learning conditions for students by providing a variety of supports and increasing capacity within the school. So overall, in terms of the total positions at elementary, we're recommending 3,151.94 FTE, which represents a reduction of 73.48 from what was recommended a year ago. Moving on to secondary. Sorry, Mike, slides, thank you. So at secondary, again, using the 23-to-1 formula to generate classroom teachers, we are recommending the complement that's being brought forward represents a reduction of about 52 FTE from what was recommended or what was projected a year ago. In terms of other in-school support positions, you'll see a slight reduction in guidance and in slight reduction in guidance, which is formula driven and is directly tied to enrollment. There's an increase of 1 in library, and I spoke earlier about staffing for the virtual campuses. And so we are bringing forward a recommendation for an additional library position, which is actually tied to the collective agreement requirement to have a teacher librarian in all of our schools. We did not have a teacher librarian this year in the OCV secondary campus, but are bringing, have had discussions with the administration at the school and with the superintendents, and feel that it is certainly could provide some valuable support next year. In terms of student support funding, which is the SSF that's on the slide, we are receiving similar funding through the OSSTF secondary collective agreement, equivalent to support an additional 11 positions. 5 of the positions will be allocated to continue the program enhancement positions that have been in place. And that leaves a balance of 6. And again, we have not discussed how those positions could best be allocated, but we'll be doing that in the coming weeks. The only other change is a reduction of 0.83. Last year, the board approved an increase specifically to Maryville High School to support the transition to the to a non-semestered delivery model, and that 0.83 is no longer will no longer be required next year. Again, not recommending any changes to ESL. In the area of special education, learning support services is recommending the addition of positions to support a new general learning program class where students would be partially integrated. And so the increased allocation includes some additional sections that would be provided to the school so that to ensure that the students had courses during the integrated part of their day. And the reduction in learning support teachers, again, is formula driven. The one last thing is we're showing an increase of 1 in the central complement of staff, and that's to reflect the decision that was made by the board recently to add a central equity coach. So that's the one addition that you see. So again, a reduction of 44 FTE from what was projected last year at this time, again, largely driven by the decrease in projected enrollment that we're seeing for next year. Next slide. We also distributed earlier today an Appendix D, which includes a summary of the changes that I've outlined, as well as the costing implications. So trustees will find that in their package as well. Just wanted to highlight that, as I said, part of senior staff's deliberations is looking at areas of priority and areas of where there are pressures, and then determining whether or not there's a need to bring forward recommendations for increases or whether or not there are opportunities to reallocate. Just wanted to highlight there were some areas in particular that we looked at, but at the end of the day decided, at least not at this point, to bring forward recommendations for changes. That includes the increased pressures that we're seeing on our elementary vice principals in particular, based on the challenges related to replacement staffing this year and the impact on their enrollment overall. Also, again, some of the pressures related to staffing for the virtual sites moving forward. We looked closely at our ESL in particular as well, and the supports for our ELD classes, and whether we needed to bring forward some additional staffing recommendations in those areas. But again, feel that these positions that have been allocated through the Student Support Fund may provide an opportunity for us to invest in those areas. So I think that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Superintendent McCoy. Very, very thorough presentation. We do have some questions, starting with Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the, as usual, incredibly detailed presentation. A lot of numbers to get through. The one question I have, because I couldn't find it in the addendum to the report, and I can't see it on the charts for elementary or secondary. If we are adding LST and or LRT support for our OCV for September, where does that show up? Because the numbers of the changes that are shown for the numbers don't seem to be reflecting that, and it doesn't seem to be mentioned in the addendum.
So through you, Mr. Chair, it's not specifically identified in the report. So the plan, and I'll start and then defer to Superintendent Simmons. But generally, the approved allocation of LRT and LST, once approved, is then allocated across schools based on a number of considerations, which includes the enrollment in the school, as well as needs within the school, and that's an allocation that's recommended by staff within learning support services. As I said, because we are planning ahead, our plan would be that some of the approved allocation of LRT and LST would be allocated to support the OCV schools. The number of LRT and LST will depend on both the number of students who opt to attend OCV, as well as the learning needs of those students as assessed by Learning Support Services. So at this point, we haven't made a determination because we don't know how many students will need to be supported within the virtual environment.
But basically then you think it can be done through reallocation in accordance with the size of the different schools, rather than increasing the total complement by X number of LST, LRT
yes,
virtual schools.
Yes, and through you, Mr. Chair, the complement when we didn't have virtual schools supported the full complement of our students. And so we feel that by carefully allocating the LRT and LSTs that are approved, we will be able to provide that support. And I don't know if Superintendent Simmons would like to add anything.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have anything to add. Really, that's exactly what we're looking at as we get a sense of which students at which schools are selecting virtual or in-person learning. We will then turn to identifying the needs either in the virtual school at OCV or at the bricks and mortar school, and make a determination on recommendations for LST, LRT allocations at both sites.
Thank you for the clarification. I thought it was important to understand whether there was a thought of this just means more LST, LRT positions, or whether in fact it is a difference in the allocation because we still have, give or take, the same number of students across the system. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Trustee Scott. Moving on to Trustee Bell.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I will try to be as concise as possible because I would really like to hear from our union reps and our committee chairs on this topic. So a plug there. So about last year, this time, we came together as a board and we laid out our priorities and principles for pandemic planning, school planning. And at that meeting, everyone will remember around the table that it became very clear that equity would be our priority. And so we were assured by the administration that in this pandemic, they would lower the class sizes of neighborhoods and communities that have been traditionally disadvantaged through socioeconomic disadvantage. I have not heard anything in this presentation that speaks to that commitment. And we are still in a pandemic. So if you could please clarify how certain equity seeking communities, ones that are most disadvantaged traditionally, will be supported through this staffing allocation and exercise going forward. That would be very much appreciated.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start and perhaps others will want to add. As indicated, we have developed this plan based on the assumption that the additional dollars that were provided and which included dollars to add teaching positions may not be forthcoming next year based on current advice from the ministry. We also think that that is an assumption or that is direction based on an assumption that we will be returning to at least a more usual or normal time as of September. However, if it looks like there is ongoing need, then we anticipate that the ministry's current position may change and that some of the additional dollars will need to continue, as Superintendent Carson said earlier, for example, the continuation of funding for PPE, and similarly, continuation of funding to provide cleaning or support additional teachers for smaller classes. However, in the absence of that, there are some things that we can still do locally. For example, one of the things that we have been upfront about is that we will be continuing to create larger classes virtually so that we can redirect those resources to our in-person schools, and try to ensure that the average class size in our in-person is less than it is in virtual. As well, we can use the allocation formula to monitor what the classes are looking like, and pay close attention to schools that are identified, among the group that Trustee Bell referred to. There are, of course, limits when we know that across the district we have to make sure that we are organizing classes within the class size caps in the case of kindergarten and in the case of our primary classes. However, there are also opportunities through our needs allocation, for example, and we regularly hold back some positions so that, again, we can, as we move into the fall, address situations where we think additional classes are required to achieve more acceptable class sizes. So those are just a couple of the things that we can do.
Thank you very much. And I'll follow up with hopefully a very straightforward question that I want to know whether equity will continue to drive our decisions when it comes to staffing. And I'll just give a quick snapshot. Looking at English with core French, we have a number of split classes. We're talking 3 split classes right now. So when we're looking at decisions such as that, where we're not serving the population, that we, as best as we could, by combining 3 classes together, will that be part of our equity lens that we look at our future staffing from?
So through Mr. Chair, I'll try to provide as brief an answer as I can. That equity is always a consideration when we look at the allocation of resources. It is always something that we consider that includes different factors that are either apparent based on the numbers or that are brought forward by the principal or through the superintendent, and not just in terms of how we create classes, but the additional resources that are allocated to those schools as well, in terms of the other school supports that are part of the academic plan.
Thank you. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Bell. And moving on to Trustee Campbell.
Thank you. I will follow up on one of Trustee Bell's questions, uncannily similar to some of my concerns, but I want to start with one question. I'd just like a little bit more clarity, if I could, around the LD SIT change. So is this basically a cost-saving measure, or maybe I just don't understand it? Is this fundamentally a cost-saving measure? We figure that with fewer FTE, we can still serve the students essentially and address their needs? Or do we believe that indeed the partial integration of these students was a failed experiment? Or I guess I'd just like a little bit more understanding of why we're making this change. Yeah.
Through Mr. Chair, I'll start, and then I see that Superintendent Simmons and Manager Kay are here as well. So it's not a reduction in the resources that are being allocated to these programs. It is strictly a change in the delivery model and tied directly to the pandemic and the need to cohort students, as opposed to have them cohorted or congregated for part of the day and integrated for the other part of the day. And with that, I will defer to Superintendent Simmons or Manager Kay.
Thank you, Superintendent McCoy, and Mr. Chair, through you. So in the design of the LD SIT model, we absolutely believe in the model and the integration approach to help practice and generalize skills that are learned in the congregation portion of the day to practice those skills in a regular class. In order to support that in a regular class, we have created a model where each school gets allocated a 0.5 learning resource teacher to support during the integration periods. Because of the pandemic and the need to cohort students, we haven't been able to do that integration piece. Which means that 0.5 LRT isn't necessary to support integration because it can't happen due to the cohorting rules. So we are temporarily assigning people. They won't be doing an LRT role. They'll be doing a special education class role for next year. We also wanted to build in some flexibility because if we are able to shift back to where we can do integration again, we want to be able to have some flexibility around a team teaching model for next year. And then the plan for the following year, assuming things are back to the original vision for LDSIP, we will be looking at reintroducing the 0.5 LRTs at that time.
Okay, I'll have to wrap my head around that. Thank you very much. Okay, there's a plan. Thank you. And then my next question is basically similarly, I understand we will have following up perhaps on Trustee Bell's question set. Obviously, this past year, we had a lot of OCD classrooms. This coming year, I'm assuming we're foreseeing, based on the staffing projections and one principal for elementary and this kind of thing, we're anticipating far fewer online classrooms next year. I mean, I guess we'll see, but I think that's the anticipation. So presumably, are being able to have sort of larger classes in OCV to help keep numbers down in certain key areas in person, that resource will be importantly diminished, presumably, because we won't have that much OCV right? So we won't. So presumably, our in-person class sizes will go up on average. I mean, that's just math, right? Okay. Now, this, and I'm seeing nods, so I'm on track so far. But as well, at the beginning of this present year, I know that staff had also made the commitment within in-person schools to have smaller class sizes in certain key schools. I've never had a report on exactly what we were able to achieve in that regard. It was talked to, but I don't know what our numbers actually ended up being and whether there is really an important difference or not. But more to the point here, I guess what I'm wondering is, what are we looking forward to for this next year in that regard?
Again, we'll be limited based on the resources that are available. We won't have access to the additional funds that were provided this year in a couple of different ways. And it is possible that, if the numbers are smaller in virtual, as you indicated, Trustee Campbell, less benefit to the in-person in terms of the larger classes. We did this year plan in terms of the smaller classes. As time has evolved, and we've looked at some of the classes, there's no question that some of the in-person classes have increased in some schools more than others, as we looked at schools, for example, that generally have increases in their enrollment because they're in areas that are growing, or due to students moving in some cases due to students moving back from OCV into in-person. We as indicated, accommodated those on a case-by-case basis and tried to ensure that it didn't increase the class sizes too significantly, but there's no question that class sizes have crept up in some places more than others. In terms of planning moving forward, nothing else really to add other than the response to Trustee Bell's question earlier, and that is that we always look at some schools more carefully than others in terms of trying to ensure that the overall resources that are allocated to those schools are differentiated based on the needs of those schools. It hasn't traditionally been around the classroom portion of it, and there will be some capacity, but limited capacity for us to do that as we move forward. But again, depending, our expectation is that although the ministry is saying right now no additional funding, that in the event that our sort of optimistic view of what the situation might be in September changes, that there would have to be some additional resources to allow districts to maintain the health and safety protocols that were in place this year. And that would include some additional funds to support smaller classes.
Thank you. I've only have a few seconds. I may need to be put back on the list, time permitting. But just to follow up on that, though, we do have flexibility grades 4 to 8, right, in terms of our class sizes. Maybe we don't have flexibility with the others, but we presumably could do something important in terms of a sharply reduced class size in certain key schools. Have staff considered that?
So that's something that we always do, is that we look at class sizes in different schools differently already whenever we are reviewing the enrollments, which we do at different key points in the staffing process. Looking at schools of 30 in some class sizes of 30 in some schools, we may not be inclined to add a class to lower that, and in other schools would be. And again, that's part of looking at the whole school in terms of its needs.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I did want to just augment the response that Superintendent McCoy has provided to the questions that Trustee Bell and Trustee Campbell have asked pertaining to equity. And one of the things that we have the benefit of is a year of learning and looking at data of where impact has come. And so while it is that we are looking at some more restraints pertaining to the resources that we will be allocated for the allocation of staff, that the only place that staffing isn't the only place, nor may it be the priority place to consider equity. So when we were going into the circumstance with blinders back last year, we do have the benefit of the data that tells us that to date, we have had 14 cases of transmission in school over the course of an entire year, and 147 schools, 60,000 students, and 5,000 staff. And so when we think about 14 transmissions, we then think about, we then put into context where it is that we're prioritizing. But what we've also learned is we've learned that our communities where English is not the family language of operation, that has indeed become a priority because not being able to communicate certain pieces around safety and around access has frightened communities, has marginalized communities. And so when we start to think about how it is we allocate resources from an equity point of view, we also need to think about what is informing the priority of where it is we put that. And so I will say to you that the access to language and information and communication has quickly emerged as a very significant priority where we will have some opportunity to redirect some funds. You also heard that the trust or the superintendent referred to the student achievement through equity focus. And that goes back to a comment that a number of trustees have raised, including Trustee Ellis, a number of weeks ago and in previous conversations around how it is that we are actually driving forward achievement in some of our lower performing underserved schools. And so how it is we continue to put our minds there does become a priority, because what we've also learned this year is that where learning gaps have occurred in certain circumstances and in certain neighborhoods, has been exacerbated significantly more in other communities. And so it's effective pedagogy, effective instruction, effective gap closing becomes a huge priority. So when we start to talk about where it is we put the funds and the resources for staff and support, when we're thinking about 14 transmissions across the entire district of, again, 60,000 students and 5,000 staff, compared to what we've learned about achievement and access to resources and digital and so forth, I think that there's a different kind of priority that we have now than what we had a year ago.
Okay, thank you very much. I have Mr. Lesage next.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I would state first, if we're looking for places to be flexible with funding, I know a previous speaker mentioned 4 to 8. Our junior and intermediate teachers would report they already have the highest class sizes of any in the system. We would discourage further flexibility in adding to the class sizes in junior and intermediate because they're already the highest anywhere in the board. We note, and I think the number was $20 million is the reduction that's coming from the province, which is going to force the board to reduce staffing. I wonder what advocacy or what channels the board would have, trustees through OBSPA, what channels are available for you to join with our organization, ETFO, in lobbying for that funding to be maintained. We're going to have a lot of cleaning up to do next year after an extremely difficult year. We've heard a lot already about mental health with our students, gaps in learning. It seems to be especially ill-advised next year to be reducing staffing and increasing class sizes. Is there anything the board is going to do to help us to advocate for retaining this staffing?
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Lesage. Good points. I think that the chair and myself will think about that point moving forward. And we're going to move on to
supplemental, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
A lot to digest here tonight, and thank you for the very detailed report. We look forward to ongoing discussion of the SSF funding, those 21 spec ed positions. A position that is new to us, I think it was SATE, S-E-T-E, the equity position. Are there any more details that you can provide about that position?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start and then I will defer to my colleague, Superintendent Dua. It isn't a, it's not referring to a position, it's referring to an initiative. And what I had indicated is that we are planning to reallocate to FTE what are currently central positions to support the schools that have been identified to participate in the SATE initiative. But I will allow or defer to Superintendent Dua to provide more information about the initiative.
Thank you very much, and to you, Chair. SATE, by definition, means to give someone more than they deserve. And so we looked at the schools in our community that are not being served. We looked at the schools in our community that meet a certain criteria, and we looked at the criteria as based around achievement, equity, and socioeconomic needs. And we try to identify those schools and put a plan in place to address their needs by bringing the community, the school, and the parents together to make the community the hub of the school and work on revamping the learning that's happening each and every day in our school to help the students succeed.
One last supplemental.
You have, sure, you go ahead.
SPC, specialized systems classes. Are we envisioning any of those moving or being reduced this year? And what's the process that's going to be put in place to make those decisions?
So there was a, through you, Mr. Chair, there was a supplementary memo that went out as well. In a nutshell, the plan is to close a PSN at Gowling, the DD at Queen Elizabeth, and to open an ASD class at Queen Elizabeth. And the only other changes are those that we've described with regard to the LD SIP.
All right.
Is there a rationale for why the DD at Queenie is being changed to an ASD?
I'll defer to Superintendent Simmons on that.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, and also joined by Manager Kay. We have carried a number of vacancies in our semi-DD classrooms for a while, and next year the need is not forecasted to be there. We continue to assess and reassess annually, which is why the companion document comes out with the academic staffing report. So if that need should change in future years, we would have to reassess again. I don't know, Manager Kay, if there's something you would like to add. No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lesage. We have to move on to Ms. Moulison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question comes back to a comment that was made earlier that virtual classes will likely be larger than in-person classes. And my question comes, it sort of goes around equity and understanding that, of course, classes are going to be taught differently between virtual and in-person. But given that we know that you're planning on making the class sizes bigger, how do we know that we can confidently tell parents that their kiddos who are in these virtual classes are going to be getting the same amount of attention that they are in brick and mortar when we know the classes are going to be smaller, that they're going to have the same amount of resources, and they're going to have access to the same quality and level of education when there's going to be more kids in each class?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I guess I'll start first by saying that the classes will be larger, but also still within the regulated class sizes. So for example, at primary, we know that 90% of our classes must be 20 or lower. And so that applies within the virtual, to the virtual classes as well. So we know that our primary classes, for example, can't be larger than 23, and 90% of them need to be 20 or smaller. Again, when we think about the junior intermediate across the district, we have to maintain an average of 24.5. This year, I think we our planning included classes at the junior intermediate level that were probably between 32 and 35. And again, those would be larger than we would likely see across too many classes in our in-person, but not unheard of, particularly in some areas and at different points of the school year. I think, again, we're not contemplating class sizes that would be larger than what are currently in place this year. And so again, learning from the experience that we've had this year and you know, what the supports are that are required to ensure that students who are attending, whether it's in person or virtually, have the support that they need. With the benefit of experience moving forward, we anticipate that the staff who are in our virtual schools will have the benefit of the year that they've spent in terms of their ability to, again, support their students, and regardless of the class size. And again, not contemplating increasing them from what we have in place this year.
Thank you. Yeah, no one's assuming that they're going to increase from over the cap or anything like that. I'm also, I want to make sure that parents are confident that when we are talking about average class sizes, are we talking virtual as well as brick and mortar when you're averaging out those class sizes and you're giving us those numbers? Is that the two combined?
Yes, the requirement is that it's a maximum average class size across the district. And so that includes all of the classes within the district.
Okay, so I just want to also make sure that parents can be confident that we aren't going to use and stack up on the virtual side and then cut down on the brick and mortar side and still hit those averages.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I do want to be clear that because it is an average, that it just as we planned this year, the intent would be similar next year. If we are trying to maintain smaller classes in our in-person, one of the strategies that we have available to us in the absence of any additional funding coming is to make the classes in virtual on the larger side of what we would normally have, and the in-person classes therefore smaller. That is a strategy that is available to us, but again, within limits.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I was wondering if there are any further questions on this item. And I am seeing none. Very good. Thank you very much, Superintendent McCoy, for this discussion item. So right now it is 10:27, and instead of launching into the next item, I think that what we're going to do is take the 10:30 vote in order to continue. And I need 2/3 of trustees to agree if you want to continue. And so all those in favor of continuing? And opposed? So unfortunately, that vote fails 6-4. We needed 7 out of 10 to continue. So I guess at 10:30, we'll have to reschedule the matters for discussion 2120 universal screening tool to a future meeting. And with that, I'm going to have to declare the meeting adjourned. And thank you very much, and good night, everyone.